Welcome to Leading People with me, Gerry Murray. This is the podcast for leaders and HR decision makers who want to bring out the best in themselves and others. Every other week, I sit down with leading authors, researchers, and practitioners for deep dive conversations about the strategies, insights, and tools that drive personal and organizational success. And in between, I bring you one simple thing, short episodes that deliver practical insights and tips for immediate use. Whether you're here for useful tools or thought-provoking ideas, Leading People is your guide to better leadership. Why do even the most carefully planned change initiatives often fail? What are some of the most misunderstood ideas in change leadership, especially when it comes to motivation, collaboration, and how people respond to uncertainty? And what if the biggest obstacle to change is the brain itself? In this episode, my guest is workplace neuroscience expert Hilary Scarlett and author of Neuroscience for Organisational Change, now in its third edition. We explore how neuroscience can help leaders design change that works with the brain, not against it. Hilary shares practical strategies to reduce threat responses, boost clarity and fairness, and foster cultures of psychological safety. It's a conversation full of insights for anyone leading people through uncertainty, transformation, or growth. Here's our conversation. Hilary Scarlett, welcome to Leading People.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
And you're coming in from which part of the world today?
I'm based in London, UK.
Right. Now, you've just released the third edition of your book, Neuroscience for Organisational Change, and we're going to get to that in a few minutes. But first, so my listeners can get to know you better, how did you come to focus your work at the intersection of neuroscience and organisational change? And were there any pivotal people, places, or moments that shaped this journey to where you are today?
I've worked in organisational change for many years, and probably about 15, 20 years ago or so, I was doing studies in psychology, postgraduate studies in psychology, and there I came across an article written by a psychiatrist saying we can now understand enough about the human brain to apply that to the world of work. And that really caught my interest, thinking perhaps if we can bring a bit more science and evidence to what goes on when we're going through change, that would be really helpful. So originally, I went off and studied virtually with neuroscientists in the States. Over the last 10 years or so, I've been working with neuroscientists here in the UK, particularly at University College London. And I kind of see my role as taking their work out of the lab and bring it into the workplace in a practical way. So that's what my work is. It's a mixture of the science, but perhaps more importantly, what does that mean to us as leaders in organizations?
Right. And you're doing a lot of consulting work, I believe. That's
exactly, yeah. I think probably 95% of my work now is working with neuroscience, applied neuroscience, working with leaders, managers, all people. Because I am just a big believer that if you could understand your brain better, how helpful that will be. Because I think for all of us, it's our key work tool, so to speak. And, we have good days and bad days. And I think if we can understand our brains, maybe we can enable ourselves to have more good days at work.
Right. So for my listeners out there, there's a lot of really rich stuff coming up because you're going to probably give us some examples later on as we get through this conversation. So stay tuned because we're going to explore this topic. And let's face it, organizational change is everywhere, right? It's constant, right? So let's just now get to the book, and let's explore why this book and why now. But you've been exploring this field, as you say, for years. And what's kind of changed in our understanding of neuroscience, and what made you feel that now was the time to revisit and expand the book? It's the third edition. So
this is the third edition. That's right, and that the first edition came out 9 years ago. So it's been a while since I wrote the first edition. The second edition came out about 3 years after that. And the reason now to go to a third edition is partly because technology is moving on, so revealing more things. In fact, one of the reasons why we're hearing so much about neuroscience generally is technology. that up until pretty recently, neuroscience was a pretty grim and gory science, because the main way we learned about the brain was from babies born with some kind of brain damage, adults who acquired brain damage during their lives, or looking at the brains of animals. But technology means that neuroscientists can now look at the likes of us, people with healthy brains, and see what's going on. And what's really moving on again is portable technology. So the ability to do what's called hyperscanning, where neuroscience can look at multiple brains at the same time in the workplace, in the school, in college and university, wherever. And that's what's moving on our knowledge again. So there were a couple of areas that hyperscanning really helps, and that was what caught my interest. So it's time to explore that more.
Okay. And actually, when you mentioned this demystifying of the neuroscience and the emergence in the last 10, 15 years of this notion of applied neuroscience, which is not having to know all the detail of how the brain works, but actually knowing the impact it's having when it shows up in different contexts. There's also, it just reminded me that there's a fantastic book by a French neuroscientist called Stanislas Dehaene, and it's entitled How We Learn. And one of the key tenets of this book is how AI people and neuroscientists are working together, and they actually finding ways to complement each other's why, because the AI guys are trying to code the brain stuff, and because of the way they're trying to code it mathematically and algorithmically, it's actually feeding into a better understanding of aspects of the brain. So he one of his key points in the early part of his book, which I read a couple of years ago, is really about like we're at a kind of interface of these two things where technology and neuroscience is actually coming together in a complementary way, which is quite fascinating, really. Okay, so let's get into the whole concept of change and why it's so difficult at an organizational level. So as human beings, we're actually quite adaptable. You know, we survive. Darwin would probably say, you know, he'd have his say about how that was. And yet we often resist change, which is about usually adapting. And from a neuroscience perspective, what is it about organizational change that creates such friction in our brains? And what can leaders do differently once they understand this?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it reminds me, a while ago, I was working with the the tech team in one of the large banks, and I remember one of them asking, so how come people always want the latest device, the latest iPhone, whatever, and yet when it comes to IT change at work, everybody hates it and resists it. And I think one of the big difference is choice. Choice makes a big difference to it. If I've chosen now to have my new iPhone or whatever, that's exciting. If I feel that IT change is being imposed upon me, that's more difficult. So I think, as you say, we are incredibly resilient creatures. We're incredibly adaptable. There are people out there living in space. We live in all parts of the world. But our brains are brilliant things, but organizational change does take away some of the things that our brains really want. So one of the things our brains really want to do is they want to be able to predict, because if they can predict what's coming up, they're better placed to protect us. And it's all about survival for the brain. And change often means we can't predict. We don't know what's coming up. Also, our brains tend to like habits. They use a huge amount of energy. A disproportionate amount of energy for their size. So our brains on the whole like habits. They like things to stay as they are. Again, what does change mean? Change means things are going to be different. I'm going to have to change the way I do things. And also that bit about choice and control. And research does show that organizational change that feels unpredictable and uncontrollable is incredibly stressful to the human brain. And I guess if we all think back 5 years ago, COVID, 5 years ago, unpredictable, uncontrollable, very stressful. So that's one of the reasons why it can be so difficult. And I think particularly for leaders, one of the things leaders need to remember is that bit about unpredictable, uncontrollable. Leaders probably have more sight over what's coming up. They probably have a bit more influence over what's coming up. And I think they need to stay mindful of the fact that people further down the organization don't have that same sense of control and ability to see what is coming up. So their brains are probably in a more stressed place than those of leaders.
I mean, in some ways, the challenge leaders have is they spend quite some time figuring out the change stuff. Obviously, COVID's different because it comes at you, but a lot of stuff, they figure it out. And then they cannot not know what they know. and at the same time, they're not aware that other people don't know it. And so they're thinking ahead, as you say, and yet the vast majority of people don't even know why we have to go through this, right? And then you have this disconnect with the messaging doesn't get across, and the leaders are surprised that people are resisting what they think is the obvious and logical thing to do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a couple of points. Like one, that research shows we become leaders. As you say, we kind of forget that other people don't know what we know. And there is research around that we kind of assume people have the same information as us. And I think the other thing that, as you say, I think leaders have that time to go into darkened rooms with consultants or whoever, look at the data, look at the information, think it through, and work out why option A is better than B or C. But then I think a lot of organizations, in their haste to get on with change, then go to broadcast mode and kind of go, here's the plan, here's why it's good for you, here's why it's good for customers, here's why it's good for stakeholders. Now, please get on with it. And then wonder why most employees dig their heels in. And in many cases, it's because employees have not had that chance to get it in the same way that leaders have. And that bit about having that moment of insight of, oh, I get it, I can see why option A is better, makes a big difference to our brains, that moment of insight. And I think that's a really important step that a lot of organizations miss in terms of change, is giving employees that chance to get that moment of understanding, that moment of insight.
On Leading People, the goal is to bring you cutting-edge thought leadership from many of the leading thinkers and practitioners in leadership today. Each guest shares their insights, wisdom, and practical advice so we can all get better at bringing out the best in ourselves and others. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and share a link with friends, family, and colleagues. And stay informed by joining our Leading People LinkedIn community of HR leaders and talent professionals.
And like you talk about prediction, well, I mean, amongst the neuroscience community, it's well known that the brain is constantly predicting machine. It's trying to anticipate risk, it's trying to anticipate outcomes all the time. People may not realize that, but your brain is constantly trying to work out what's happening. But the habits thing is quite a powerful one. I actually, yesterday or the day before, I do this regular webinar at the European institutions here in Belgium called Learning to Learn. And actually what we focus on is habit. Because when we acquire a skill, become accomplished at something, we want it to be habitual because that means it's embedded in us. However, having to unlearn things, and there's a lot of literature coming out now, I think, around actually to learn something new, you have to unlearn things that you already know. And we run against these kind of little technical things like the myelination of, what makes us able to do things is the strengthening of the neural connections. And sometimes what we've been asked to do is that, maybe I'm wrong here, but we've been asked to do during change is to unravel some of that and then create different or new connections or complementary connections, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And what can be very hard is it can be very hard for the brain to unlearn, because you're right, when we've got habits or ways of doing things, it's kind of like we've got a path in the brain. And when we want to change that habit, it's kind of like saying to the brain, you've got to leave that path and create another new path elsewhere. Obviously, from a brain point of view, the brain would rather stick with the well-known path. It's easier. It's less effortful for us. Research also shows it's less stressful for us when we're using habits. But absolutely, we can create that new path. And once we've used it 50, 100 times, it'll become well established. But one of the professors I work with at UCL does a lot of work with elite athletes. And he was telling me a story a while ago about working with an elite female tennis player. And she'd wanted to change the grip on her forehand, I think it was. She practiced. Not quite enough, he thought. She got into a match, and sure enough, she used the new grip, but then suddenly got into a tight spot in the match and suddenly went back to the old grip. And I think that's a great example. If those new habits are not well enough established, when we're under pressure, when we're stressed, or indeed when we're tired, our brains will quite often go back to those old habits, because it's actually quite hard for the brain quite often to get rid of that old path. So we need to make sure that the new path, the new habit, the new pattern of thinking, whatever it is we want, is better established than the old one.
Okay. So what's emerging here, I have some questions here, but what's emerging is a sort of kind of complement complementarianess to what I have written down here in front of me. And that is, a lot of change perhaps is communicated as a lot of what. And often the blocker is where in the how,
Yeah.
And you talk about the neuroscience and the value of it, and the value of leaders knowing about this and being aware of the impact it's having on the people that they're asking to change. And you've worked probably in organizational change 20 odd years ago, using the classic techniques of you're getting people into a room and talking about this and all those techniques are probably still valid. But what are some of the extra things you're doing now with the neuroscience distinctions to help people prepare their brains for what's coming up? And how are leaders embracing or resisting that, even in terms of like, what's the convincing process you're going through to say, we have to spend a bit more time on this before we jump into that?
Yeah, I think. There's lots of little things I think that make a difference, and I think in many ways, neuroscience, for many of us, I think in some ways it kind of supports our gut feelings about what's the right thing to do. So I think from a lot of managers and leaders, actually is kind of a relief in some ways. So those things I'm doing that I thought maybe were right, they are a good thing to do. I can remember one leader in a workshop I was running saying, so the fact I take the team out for a cup of coffee on a Monday morning, that's not a frivolous thing to do. That's a good thing to do. It's absolutely, social connection is so important to us. And I think that's one of the things that neuroscience really brings home, is the importance of feeling I belong. We are deeply social creatures, and especially during times of change, we need to feel that we belong and that our manager cares about us. So little things like that, or other things like just having a good old laugh with the team as well. I again, various managers, leaders I've worked with, like to have a bit of fun, but is that a bit frivolous? And the message is no, having a good old laugh with the team is a really good thing to do. Laughter is a great de-stressor to the brain. And there's also research from Warwick University that shows that having a good old laugh actually in the short term increases our IQ by a little bit, just quite a short-term effect. So it's these little things. And so that bit about choice, giving people a bit of choice, a bit of control, makes a big difference to us. No one wants to feel they're a complete victim of what's going on. I think the importance of short-term wins, that people change. I think we often feel a bit daunted. Am I up to it? Am I capable of it? I know I used to be able to use the old systems competently, but will I be able to do that with the new system? So I think the more people can have kind of little wins and feel like they are winners, it changes the chemicals in our brains and it sets our brains up to take on bigger challenges. So making people feel like they're doing well. Or indeed, if people are struggling right now, again, just getting to think about a time when they felt they were being really successful and doing really well. And to the brain, it's kind of almost like the brain is back there again, and just gives people a bit more confidence if they're kind of struggling with the change that's around. So I think part of the beauty of neuroscience is lots of little things can make a big difference to us in terms of change.
Okay. And I guess a lot of these little things are in the book.
And they are, absolutely.
Okay,
There's a whole, throughout the book, and there's a specific chapter that's all about these little things, about how do we get brains back on track? How do we keep people performing when they are in the midst of uncertainty?
Okay, so there's a special offer coming up later, so stay tuned, everyone, because Hilary's we're going to dive into one or two of the things you mentioned there, referenced there, because you've in the book, you make a link between neuroscience and collaboration. You've already mentioned this idea of social, and you talk about this concept of interbrain synchronization and the social brain. So could you explain how these ideas help us understand what either enables or blocks the collaboration during change efforts?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, interbrain synchronization is one of the things that kind of drove me to write the third edition. Because the great thing for me about writing the third edition is my opportunity to go back and work with the neuroscientists and talk to them and learn from them. So I learn more than anybody else in a way. So interbrain synchronization caught my interest. It's enabled by the ability now of neuroscientists to kind of put these little caps on people, EEG caps or FNIRS caps that can, so we can wear them in the organization. And it means that neuroscience can now look at multiple brains at the same time. And there's this really interesting studies coming out about when our brains begin to synchronize, the same parts of the brain begin to activate at the same time in the same way. it suggests that we're beginning to see the world from a similar perspective as others. So really important in terms of trying to reach consensus or agreement around things. But there's also research that shows that brains that begin to synchronize, teams begin to perform better. There's research that shows children in school, when their brains are synchronizing in the classroom, they're more engaged, they're retaining information better. There's research that shows when we're beginning to synchronize, we seem to have more psychological safety. We seem to be more prepared to share information with people. So there's all sorts of interesting reasons why interbrain synchronization is significant to us in the organization. This ability to collaborate, this ability to perform better as a team. And also, interestingly, neuroscience does reveal what are some things that help that. Well, some things that help that are the more we know people, on the whole, the better the more our brains start to synchronize. So there's studies done with mothers and children, and their brains will synchronize a lot together. But really interesting on that one, mother and child talking together face to face, their brains will synchronize a lot. Put them onto a screen, talking virtually, and their brains will synchronize less. So I think there are some interesting questions there in terms of what work is best done where, because communicating via screen seems to reduce interbrain synchronization. All that said, there are times when you don't want brains to synchronize. If you want people to be creative and having different ideas, then you don't want people looking at the world from a similar perspective. You want differing views. So again, it's just making people aware of the benefits of interbrain synchronization and times when we need it and times when it's less useful.
Yeah.
It reminds me of some workshops I would have been involved in years ago where people would have seen this as esoteric type stuff, and yet it's actually real. This ability for people to, it's almost like finishing each other's sentences. There's a science behind it. It's just, it sometimes feels a bit weird. How did that person know what I know what you're thinking, kind of thing. But it does happen when people form those deep connections, or you have things like mirror neurons anyway, and other factors that are creating that bond. And my theory on the screen thing is that when people feel connected, there's an energy field that binds them, and the screen interferes with that sense of we can't explain energy connection. We know it when we have it, and we know it when we don't. You know, it's that just feeling. And in some languages, they have expressions around that, which, you know, around how they sense other people. And the screen tends to diminish some of that. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and hurrah for technology. We're having this conversation today because of technology. So hurrah for technology in many ways. But yeah, there's a price to pay with it as well that we just need to be aware of what work is best done where. Absolutely. Okay. So we've got this interbrain synchronization now. Another key factor that is playing out in the change process, and you kind of referred to it earlier, because you're kind of, a lot of what you said earlier tends to be activating the reward systems in the brain, and let's say playing down or controlling that sort of amygdala, more emotional area. So let's get into the emotional stuff now a little bit, because you touch on a concept which is emerging as quite a hot topic called interoception. And let's talk about interoception, what that is, and decision-making under stress, and how people interpret uncertainty, and what leaders can do to let's say, support people when they're going through what they feel emotionally charged transitions.
Yeah, and again, I think the emotional aspects of change are so important, and I think again, it's one of those areas we kind of perhaps underestimate the importance of emotions in terms of how we work, how we perform, how we feel about organisational change. So yeah, as you say, interoception is another really interesting new area, and that's another reason that drove me to want to write the third edition, to go and explore it more with neuroscientists. And what it's all about is that ability to pick up on that we talk about gut feelings, and again, science says there's something to it. We do have gut feelings, but it's about the ability to pick up accurately on those feelings. And some people are better at it than others. There was a really interesting study done in a city with traders. A guy called John Coates, who was a trader, now a neuroscientist at Cambridge, and he was interested in why were some traders just making better decisions, better under stress, lasted a long time in what is quite a stressful job? And one of the things they found with city traders, the ones who were really successful, is they were better at interoception. In this particular case, they were better at picking up what their heart rate was without putting their hand on their heart or their pulse. They didn't know they were better at it, but those who were tended to make the better decisions under stress. And there's other research too that shows people who are good at interoception tend to be able to regulate their emotions better, which is so important during change. And they're just better at picking up on them accurately. So that's really important, that ability to manage emotions.
I've heard about that study, and I think if somebody's out there now maybe thinking, but okay, so I'm doomed, I don't have it. Actually, I think the science is starting to show that you can learn it. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. That's the really good news. That is the really good news. We can all get better at it. And quite simple things, and just things like anyone who practices yoga will know just doing that body scan once a day makes us better at picking up on interoception, on our gut feelings, internal feelings. So we can get better at it. That's the really good news. It's one of those things we can all improve on.
Okay. And then let's talk about decision making under stress. What does stress do to our ability to make decisions?
Yeah, well, this is an interesting one in terms of male and female, where decisions begin to differ between men and women. That men under stress will take more risks. Women under stress will take fewer risks. So it's an interesting thing in organisations. But under long-term stress, men will become more cautious too. But again, it's one of those interesting to just be aware of the different reactions of men and women under stress. But also to be aware that when you've got a mixed group of men and women, that the male risk-taking tends to take over. So the importance of listening to everybody in the room, because the risk-taking will tend to dominate if you've got more men in the room, if you've got men in the room out with women. So again, it's just one of the things to be aware of, that why we differ.
And there have been studies about the success rate of, let's say, female-heavy board of management during crisis situations.
Yeah.
And perhaps this explains a little bit what's going on in terms of maybe not just their ability to manage risk under stress and stressful situations. There may be some other aspects of empathy and that compassion maybe sitting underneath it as well, which we may or may not get to. How important is that empathy and compassion when it comes to change?
I mean, hugely important. I think we are deeply social creatures, more than we probably realize. I do think that kind of the need for social connection, that sense of empathy with us, I think it's one of those areas we've underestimated at work. I think, we get it in our personal lives that relationships matter. And on the whole, when relationships are good, life is pretty good. But I do think it's one of those areas historically in organizations, we've kind of expected employees to walk through the workplace door, either literally or metaphorically, and somehow things shouldn't affect us in quite the same way because we're professionals, so it shouldn't affect us quite the same way. But we absolutely do. Say we are social creatures. We're constantly checking out, do I fit in? Do I belong? And that bit about empathy and feeling that we're understood is really important. And it goes right back to when we're babies. As mammals, we start as babies. As babies, we wouldn't make it through our first weeks, months, years of life without someone taking an interest in us. And babies will scream and cry when they're tired and they're hungry, but also when they're separated from their caregiver, because babies absolutely know, is somebody interested in me? Do they care about me? If they do, I'm okay. If not, I'm not okay. And that kind of carries on throughout life, less overtly. But again, it's all feeling, does my manager care about me? Are they interested in me? If they are, I'm okay. If not, I'm not okay. So that need for social connection, there's nothing soft about it. It has a big impact on our ability to perform and our staying power and our resilience. So social connection, empathy, really important.
And there are so many different studies and methodologies out there that continue to even Gallup's 12 famous engagement factors. One of them is that I have somebody who cares about me at work, right?
Yeah.
And the uncertainty bit then, because let's face it, everything is uncertain if you think about it, right?
Yeah.
Because you and I don't even know what we're going to say next. No. That's uncertainty. Yet we're dealing with it, right?
Yeah.
we're kind of dealing with it. Okay. So what is it about uncertainty, and how can leaders give certainty to the uncertainty?
You're listening to Leading People with me, Gerry Murray. My guest this week is workplace neuroscience expert Hilary Scarlett. Coming up, we explore why giving people certainty, fairness, and a sense of control is far more powerful than most leaders realise, and what happens in the brain when we get those things right. Now, back to our conversation.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think especially at the moment, I think there's just so much uncertainty generally in the world. It's not just in the workplace. I think, we're faced with so much uncertainty in what's going on in all sorts of ways. So I think it's particularly relevant at the moment. And a couple of things. I was working with an organisation last year where they knew changes were coming up and they were HR changes. So they're going to affect people's jobs, but they didn't know what the changes were. So a couple of things we talked about with managers and leaders there is, one, be a good listener. You can always listen. You might not have the answers, but actually being listened to, not surprisingly, is rewarding to the brain, just feeling that we're being really, really listened to. And I think the other thing is giving certainty about what you can give certainty about. So you might not be able to give certainty about when the change will happen or what they will be, but just giving people certainty about the relationship they have with you and the way in which you will communicate with them, that you can say to them, okay, I don't know what's coming up, but I promise you I'll sit down with you every Thursday morning or whatever it is, and I'll tell you what I know and I don't know. So giving them certainty around that. And again, I think the importance of short-term goals when people are feeling very uncertain, that as long as people can feel I've achieved something today, I can tick things off my list, that kind of feels good. So short-term goals can be really useful in a time of uncertainty because, as you say, our brains are prediction machines. They crave certainty, but they can never have it. As you say, we can never have it. But it's one of the things our brains want. And again, I think it's one of those things that's really useful to be aware of, that our brains want it, but they're never going to have it. So the little things that we can do. And even small things, what about even small things like, I go to so many sessions where people say, especially during change, meetings have been called, meetings have been put into their calendars or diaries, but they don't know why. And because that threat state is so much, the amygdala, the threat state is so much stronger in our brains, we all kind of panic and go, what's it about? What have I done wrong? It must be bad news. So just little things like just send an agenda or tell people what the purpose of the meeting is. It's these little things that settle the brain. Oh, that's what the meeting's about. I can focus back on my work now. It's these little things that help provide certainty for people and help people focus back on work.
Yeah, I've had several guests on the program. A lot of what you just said, some of them came in, and Adam Galinsky, Professor Adam, talked about this thing about the email without telling you what it is, and people, distorting what could be and getting all stressed out about it. I've had Margaret Heffernan on talking about embracing uncertainty and how, we can't predict the future, and there's lots of role models out there for doing that, etc. So, and one of the things that I think really important is this idea of short-term goals, and not just the short-term goals that give quick wins, but the celebration of those, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, again, because the threat state is so much stronger in our brain, we all tend to kind of kick ourselves about the things I didn't do or I didn't get right. So as you say, I think, stopping and pausing with the team and focusing on what we have done well, what we have gone right, because the brain will tend to move on and worry about the next thing. So I think we need to, with the brain, we need to kind of deliberately counterbalance that impact, that desire to go to the threat, to the negative, to protect ourselves, and deliberately activate the reward center in our brains. So just as you say, thinking about the successes, the things that we've done well is really important.
Yeah. And the threat part of our brain is valuable. I mean, it's there for a reason, and
Absolutely.
We should pay attention to it. And at the same time, if it starts running the show, it can inhibit a lot of things for us. So we know it can stress us out and that. Now, an emerging area which is getting, it's been getting a lot of I suppose, focus in the last few years. And now I think in some parts of the world becoming part of a political discussion. But this whole idea of neurodiversity, right? And then linking it also to psychological safety. These are two themes that have come back into the book for you, or come into the book in this new edition. Why is this so important now? And what role does neuroscience play in creating safer, more inclusive workplaces where people can thrive through change, regardless of how they are as human, how they are as people. So if they have a neurodiverse profile or whatever, that it's part of acceptance, right? And allowing people to be themselves at work. And the whole idea of psychological safety is about that as well. So can you talk about that and how you decided to include this in the new edition?
In the third edition. Yeah, I think just about, as you said, there's much more awareness, I think, of neurodivergence now, neurodiversity. And I think most workshop sessions I run now, there'll always be a question about how does this apply to people who are neurodivergent? What does it mean if I'm managing a team where people are neurodivergent? And research shows about 20% of the population is neurodivergent. So that's a big percentage of the workforce or potential workforce, because it can be harder for neurodivergent people to find work. So I think it's really important from both sides for neurodivergent people to create a workplace where they feel they can thrive. But also it kind of makes economic sense from organisations and countries' point of view to get these people enable people to work and to feel they can contribute. So so I thought it was really important to include it in the book because lots of questions about it. And that chapter in the book on neurodiversity, what I've mainly done is gone out to talk to people who are neurodivergent, but also experts in change. So actually that chapter of the book is slightly different. It's got 3 kind of conversations with people who are neurodivergent, but experts in change as well. And just them talking about their experience of change and what helped them. And I think interesting, a lot of things that help neurodivergent people, actually, I think are good for all of us. The things people will talk about open plan offices, the lighting, the distractions are difficult for all of us. And research shows all our cortisol levels go up when we're working in an open plan office. But for neurodivergent people, it's that bit worse. It impedes their ability to work that bit more. So, and I think the message came home loud and clear that sometimes neurodivergent people just need a bit more time to reflect. So there might be an announcement and they might like to go away and think about it overnight and come back the next day. But again, I think that's good for most employees, actually, that chance to go home, reflect, think about it, ask questions next day. But particularly for neurodivergent people, sometimes an ability to have those one-to-one conversations, that came home loud and clear from the people I spoke to. That one person talked about just having a manager who just each day just checked in with her. Are you okay? What's your plan for today? What are you getting done? She said that made such a difference. Another man I spoke to said, again, just be able to have that ability to have one-to-ones with the manager to talk about it. And I think the other thing that came home is when we have change, as we've said, habit systems need to change. For some neurodivergent people, that can be harder because they've got real workarounds that, using a certain system or way of doing things, that's what they've kind of made work for them in the workplace. And change might take that away and they might be that bit more dependent on that old system. So again, just recognizing that some of those changes can be harder for neurodivergent people than neurotypical people. Psychological safety, I think, again, really important for all of us, but particularly, again, for neurodivergent people, that sense of I can be me, I can ask the daft questions, so to speak. I can ask questions as long as I'm being constructive and helpful and doing it with the right mindset. That's what we need. Again, important for all of us, but I think particularly for neurodivergent people to feel that they're safe and they can ask questions or make comments or whatever, as long as it's being constructive.
Yeah, I just read recently another article by Amy Edmondson. I think it was in the Harvard Business Review about clarifying what your psychological safety is not, because like everything, it's developing its own legs.
Yes.
And a bit of mythology and simplification and exaggeration and all sorts of things. So that article is an attempt to kind of say, this is what it is and this is what it's not, even though sometimes organizations, I think in some situations, not a lot, but in some situations, there's a simplification of these things and then they're interpreted in a certain way and then they actually lose their impact, because she says, like, for example, psychological safety, just to cite one thing, is not about necessarily being nice all the time. It's maybe more about being respectful rather than just being nice. So it's not about just going, we have to be always accommodating everybody's requests here. It's about a way to express things, to respect people, to allow people to express themselves, to have their opinions without being judged by those. So it's kind of interesting to also explore those things. So you have it in the change context, and that's because of the potential for the fight or flight parts of the brain to be activated. Even if a team has psychological safety before the change is announced, what impact does it have, and how can organizations and leaders ensure that it doesn't disrupt a psychologically safe team?
Yeah, because it's quite a precious thing, psychological safety as well, because it's hard to build and easy to lose, I think, because it could take, especially if leaders are under pressure or stressed. If somebody suddenly gets angry with somebody for saying something or snaps at them or whatever, that could have a real hit in terms of psychological safety. So, I think, again, it links back to, particularly for leaders, this bit about emotional regulation, but to manage their emotions is so important as part of psychological safety. Because psychological safety, it really is where leaders have to be role models. It starts with them, that ability to share information, to disclose information, to ask for feedback in a constructive way. I mean, it absolutely starts with them. So it's, so I think psychological safety, emotional regulation kind of go together in a sense in terms of the importance of them.
Okay. So I guess at this stage, if I put myself in the shoes of my listeners, we've talked a lot about a lot of the key concepts here, and they might be craving for a couple of examples, like from organizations who are actually doing this. So it's not just fine in theory. There are actually organizations out there, and you write about them, I believe, in the book, who are actually exploring this and how to use it, how to use the neuroscience constructively during change. So would you like to share a few examples?
Yeah, of course. I mean, just on the neurodiversity, I spoke to Philips, who are an organisation that seems to be really ahead of the game in terms of neurodiversity. And what they're doing is setting up lots of networks, neurodiversity networks across the organisation. And part of that is about enabling people who are neurodivergent to deal with change, to come and talk about their particular issues. And what they're doing is giving them kind of tactics and tips as to how to navigate through change. So Philips, I think, is a really interesting organisation in terms of neurodiversity and change. Another organisation I've been working with over the years is PepsiCo. And again, I think they've been really struck by the emotional sides of change, the social aspects of change that's come from neuroscience. So talking to them, they're a case study in this new third edition. And what they've really taken on board is that bit about treating leaders as people. So allowing leaders to talk about their emotions and how they're doing. They've really picked up on that. The kind of, they said every workshop, every coaching session starts off talking about the leader as a person. How are you doing? And rather than going into you as a leader, it's you as a person, because recognizing it's so important for leaders to be able to manage their emotions, again, to feel that people have got empathy for them as leaders. And also what it led them to do, I think, is this sense of trust and dealing with uncertainty. It meant what they did in certain cases is kind of disclose information to certain levels of managers that they wouldn't normally have done before. But they said it was really important. They kind of trusted them and nothing leaked. It worked. And they said that really built a good bond between leaders and those managers, because the managers felt, I'm being trusted, I'm having information shared with me at the moment that's kind of confidential, but I need it to be able to be a good manager. So again, just these just, as they say, it's a mindset. It shifted. I think PepsiCo, they would say it's PepsiCo UK would say it shifted their mindset about change, how you go about it, and just recognizing what these kind of fundamental things we need in order to enable people to change.
Now, I think you mentioned PepsiCo UK, and how does that relate to, from your experience of this, how does it relate to PepsiCo worldwide? Because I have read stuff in the past where PepsiCo was quite harsh-driven environment, right? So it's very encouraging to hear these stories. And has there been a culture change in the entire organization, or is this something that's bubbling up from the local entities?
Yeah, I've worked with PepsiCo Europe and PepsiCo UK, so that's kind of the limit of my knowledge. But certainly, they're honest about it. They will say that they're not just doing this to be nice. They're doing it because it helps the bottom line as well. That if you take people through change well, and people feel good and capable and competent, that's a good thing for the organisation in terms of performance. So they've got that commercial nous to them. They're not doing it just to be nice. They're doing it because they believe it gives them a competitive edge too. And I think, they would say that's partly, why they've caught the attention of the organisation, because this is about performance for all employees. This enables performance.
Yes. And the brain is a key variable in our ability to perform anything, isn't that right?
Absolutely. For most of us, that's pretty much all we've got, isn't it? It's our brains. It is our key work tool.
Right.
We're not out there working on the land. So absolutely, it's the key bit to understand and work with.
Yeah. And remarkable how it's still an emerging thing to put it into the mix when you're talking about things like organizational change. It's still, we still have to communicate to people that, and when we're asking for better performance, etc., we have to talk about the brain, because it's not like some sort of just go do it. I mean, if you're not in a good place emotionally or whatever, you're feeling fatigued or you're feeling stressed or whatever it is, you might not be able to rise to the occasion for that period of time or in that context. And equally, you might be overstimulated on, at times as well. So it is understanding this, which is quite critical, right?
No, absolutely, because it's because our brains are all what we've got, and I think that ability to understand them and work with it, is so important.
Okay, so coming to the end,
yep.
What's the big idea or key takeaway that you'd like our listeners to leave with today?
I think the big one for me is if we can understand our brains better, then we can work with that knowledge. And I think we have got more control over our brains than we probably realize. Just having that awareness of what's going on for us, I think gives us choice about how we respond in the moment. So for me, that's the big one, is if we can understand our brains better, we can work with that knowledge, and we can help ourselves and others perform better. And in terms of emotional well-being too, we can help ourselves flourish, I think.
Okay, so how can people get in touch with you? And is there anything special? We hinted at it earlier that you'd like to offer them, and I'll put links in the show notes. So Hilary, how can people reach out to you, and what is this special offer?
Do reach out to me on LinkedIn, or you can come via the website, scarlettandgrey.com. But I'm on LinkedIn. I'm quite active on LinkedIn, so do come and find me on LinkedIn. And my publisher will give a discount offer to the third edition, which is actually coming out on the 3rd of July in most of the world and end of July in North America and Canada. So it's not out until July, but I can provide an offer that will get people at least 25% off the book by my publisher.
And if you're listening to this in 2026, which can happen, you'll know that this book is widely available by that stage on all good bookshops, right?
Yeah, from 3rd of July, it's 3rd of July 25. It'll be out there. Absolutely.
So reach out to Hilary, mention the podcast, and Hilary will send you a code for a special discount, and you can even pre-order the book, I believe, if you're listening to this in the meantime. So, as always, Hilary, thanks a lot for sharing your insights, tips, and wisdom with me and my listeners here today.
Pleasure. Thanks very much for inviting me.
Coming up on Leading People.
When you're in a position of power, you release more chemical messengers that affect your mood, including serotonin. And so once you get that kind of addictive notion of you're in power, you kind of continue to seek the reward. And at the same time, when you're in a position of power, your empathy is reduced. So you start feeling less empathy with other people.
My next guest is BBC journalist and science writer Melissa Hogenboom, whose new book, Breadwinners, explores how power, gender, ambition, and leadership intersect at work and at home. It's a fresh take on what really drives behaviour, how invisible norms shape our choices, and what leaders can do to make change that sticks. And remember, before our next full episode, there's another One Simple Thing episode waiting for you. A quick and actionable tip to help you lead and live better. Keep an eye out for it wherever you listen to this podcast. Until next time.